Last week I shared a devotional from Hebrews chapter 12. Today I'd like to return to that passage and dwell on it some more. Listen to the first two verses of this chapter. Therefore, since we also have such a large cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy that lay before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. As we saw last week, this passage is comparing the Christian life to a race. Just like a marathon runner needs endurance, we need to have endurance as Christians. And one of the ways that we gain endurance is by keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. We need to think about how he endured the cross so that we're ready to follow his example. Last week I talked about how crucifixion was a very painful and shameful way to die. Today I want us to consider this theme of shame in more detail. Let's focus on how Jesus responded to the shame of being crucified. The writer of Hebrews said that Jesus endured the cross, despising the shame. To despise something means to look down on it or treat it with contempt. It means that we don't care about it and that we're not afraid of it. This thing that we despise is unimportant. It doesn't matter to us. That's how Jesus responded to the shame of the cross. He completely disregarded it and paid no attention to it. This is one of the keys to endurance in the Christian life. If we're going to persevere during times of persecution, then we need to follow the example of Jesus here. We need to despise any shame that we suffer for being his disciples. Now, it's important to note that we shouldn't despise every kind of shame that we experience in life. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul confronted his readers about the lawsuits that they were bringing against each other. Listen to what he said in verses 5 and 6. I say this to your shame. Can it be that there is not one wise person among you who is able to arbitrate between fellow believers? Instead, brother goes to court against brother, and that before unbelievers. What Paul was doing here was shaming his readers for their bad behavior. When we sin against God, it's a good thing for us to experience shame. It helps motivate us to confess our sin and turn away from it. But sometimes people try to shame us because they don't agree with us, or simply because they don't like us. This is the kind of shame that Jesus experienced on the cross. And we need to respond to it exactly like he did. We need to disregard it and treat it as unimportant. And when we despise this type of shame and remain faithful to Jesus, we can rest in the promise of Romans 10, verse 11. Everyone who believes on him will not be put to shame. This doesn't mean that we won't suffer some temporary shame during this life. What it means is that we won't suffer permanent shame in hell. Instead, we're going to enjoy being in God's presence for all eternity. So when we experience shame for the cause of Christ, let's respond by despising it. Let's hold fast to Scripture and not allow this shame to influence our Christian beliefs. Let's stand firm on God's truth, no matter what the world says about us or does to us. May God bless you as you live for him today.